Well, ladies and gents, welcome to CG Reaction, and this is World War One Christmas Truce Silent Night Extra History Part 1 by the channel Extra Credits. I've heard the Extra Credits a really good channel. I think I've seen some videos from them in the past. I think about something about the Spanish flu or something, I don't know. But yeah, I hear that they are a good channel with good content, so I think I'm gonna react to quite a few of their videos now. And yeah, World War One Christmas Truce. I was fascinated by this for a long time. I reacted to World War One Epic History TV series, and it was awesome. But it was also kind of surprised me that they called a truce when there was a Christmas. I mean, it's a world war. Things like this doesn't stop it, but they kind of did. Apparently, they were morally and physically tired too much. They're like, you know what? It's Christmas. Let's call it a truce. So I like that part. So I want to see it in detail. Obviously, Epic History TV didn't go into detail. So yeah, let's watch this video. And people, remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe, so I know which type of videos to react to more, which channel to react to more. And if you want me to react to some other video, comment down. And yeah, let's watch this video.
Christmas Eve, 1914. The war was supposed to be over by now.
Kinda is, isn't it?
This little holiday special is brought to you by World of Tanks. Use the invite code ARMISTICE if you're a new player who wants to check out the game. The Christmas Truce is one of the most poignant events of the First World War, a time when men rose up above the madness of the conflict and, for just a moment, saw each other as fellow humans. This is an event that definitely did happen. Thousands of men laid down arms in the truce, but a century of retellings has also kind of sanded down its rough edges and oversimplified.
That is something. So basically, from the trenches, they're like, you know what, let's call it a truce. It's Christmas, and they got out of the trenches, went to the no man's land, shook hands, and played football, something like that. I mean, when people first like, you know what, this is true, we're gonna call it a truce, we're gonna walk into no man's land. How did they didn't thought, you know what, as soon as we walk, what if they start firing? And how wasn't there much of fear there? Or maybe there was, but they were so tired, they're like, you know what, I'll take my chances, this is ridiculous.
Its messy reality. Indeed, this event wasn't just the result of pure human spirit and holiday cheer. It was a host of unique factors that drove these enemies to spontaneously declare peace in no man's land. And really, it may not have been all that spontaneous. Small armistices were happening every day. As frontline troops became accustomed to the rhythms of trench warfare, they learned that looking the other way now and then could bring a shred of safety and calm to their lives. The armies ate meals at the same time, which became a daily ceasefire. Patrols frequently ignored each other, adopting a live and let live attitude. Troops often shouted to each other across the lines. After all, the autumn battles had passed, and both sides were waiting out the winter. In reality, the weather was the primary enemy for both sides.
Yeah, I think what's happening here is obviously soldiers are the common people, so they start to think, you know what, we are just basically going out there, getting mowed down by the other side for what? For people in power to just play who's in charge or who owns what. So, after sometimes they're like, you know what, I'm all for patriotism, but this is just getting ridiculous. So slowly they're starting to realize, man, we are losing life here and we're not gaining anything. So basically, whenever they could extend a common, courtesy out of decency, so they're like, we're gonna do that. Some guy is going there, I can shoot him, but what's that going to achieve? That guy just dead. I just killed another guy for nothing. So basically, whenever they can, they look the other way. That tends to happen when something, stretches out for a long time and it's just ridiculous. People just dies left and right.
The high water table at Flanders meant that the trenches were always filling with water, sometimes collapsing and burying men inside. Soldiers leaned against the walls to sleep, trying to keep themselves out of the wet. Food supplies had to be hung up on dugout ceilings. And that winter had been particularly miserable. Weeks of rain flooded the dugouts. The mud pulled men down like quicksand. Now, British Field Marshal Sir John French...
That's basically God saying, stop it, snap out of it, all of you. Basically God saying, pouring water on them, stop this massacre, stop this, insane massacre, go home.
Had noticed the hands-off attitude his men were developing towards the enemy, and so he ordered attacks in late December to boost morale, and this resulted in heavy British losses. Concerned about possible fraternization over the holiday, he issued orders that no unofficial armistice would be tolerated. Morale was much better over in the German trenches. After all, they were winning. But many men were also experiencing their first holiday away from home. Knowing that this would be difficult, commanders brought Christmas to the trenches, shipping thousands of presents to the field. Each man received a gift from the Kaiser, cigar boxes for NCOs, a pipe with the Crown Prince on it for the ranks. The British, for their part, received a brass box from Princess Mary filled with cigarettes, tobacco, a Christmas card, and sweets. And then there were personal packages. Enterprises sprang up on the home front, offering family members a chance to send gift boxes to the troops. British soldiers received plum puddings and 1,000-count boxes of cigarettes. German and Austrian troops were bombarded with chocolate and salami and cognac. Both sides received winter clothing. In truth, though, the gifts were kind of a nuisance. I mean, there was nowhere to put it all. Soldiers didn't have a place to store 1,000 extra cigarettes. But that Christmas Eve delivered a true gift. The rain stopped, and the trenches drained. Dry cold froze the mud into a hard surface, almost like a floor. Snow dusted the countryside. That afternoon, the gunfire dwindled, and in some sectors it stopped entirely. The weather just seemed too nice for it. The Germans, stuffed with Christmas chocolate.
So that's what happened. They were already annoyed with all the fighting and deaths, and then the rain happens, it was flooding everywhere, and they were tired already. Presents starts to come in, and they're a bit happy. And then, rain stops, so they are really happy, like, this torture is over. And then, everything becomes nicer. It's Christmas evening, and a bit snowing here and there, but it's a nice environment. So they're like, what, screw this, no more fighting. So it's just they were tired so much, and rain also made it impossible to just sleep anywhere. They're like, what, things are starting to get better. Things are starting to look up. So they're like, screw this. It's a Christmas truce.
And cheered by the weather, started putting lit Tannenbaum up on their trench parapets. And then the German line started singing. Over on the British parapets, watchmen of the Scots Guard saw lines of lights along the enemy trench. At first they suspected an attack, but then they heard an ethereal sound drifting across no man's land. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, the original Austrian version of Silent Night. Sensing a challenge, Guards Officer Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse decided that they should drown this out with their own carol. The sides went back and forth, but soon the competition merged into a harmony of Good King Wenceslas and Auld Lang Syne. The men began shouting Christmas greetings across the line, jokingly at first. A few even stepped out to talk. Hulse didn't know it, but the same thing was happening up and down the entire British line. Agreements formed. In some sectors, the officers met at the wire and shook hands, agreeing to cease hostilities the next day. In other areas, the ranks took the lead, Germans shouting across no man's land, "English, tomorrow if you no shoot, we no shoot." At times, it was just one brave soul walking into no man's land waving a newspaper. These overtures were extremely dangerous. Though peace was breaking out in certain areas, it did.
Regardless of what you say, talking about Christmas miracle, look at that. I mean, obviously, human nature does kick in the end. All the killing and everything, and then people like, what? This is Christmas. We all enjoy it. We are all human. Screw the countries. So basically, holidays comes and they're like, what? Let's bring in the human factor. Enough of this. That's what happened. I like this. This is an uplifting story, and it's from World War I. That's ridiculous when you think about it.
Didn't happen everywhere. One British regiment responded to German caroling with a machine gun blast. Some unarmed soldiers were gunned down trying to broker this holiday armistice. But in most sectors, the ceasefire held. This truce mostly happened between German and British units. The French and the Belgians, whose countries were under German occupation, were less inclined. There were agreements to bury the dead and cease hostilities, but not as much fraternization. Yet a Bavarian unit held fire during a French mass, and both sides halted fighting long enough for a guest, a soloist from the Paris Opera, to make a performance. British Indian troops, who were a bit unfamiliar with this whole Christmas deal, saw the lit German trees and thought of their own holiday of Diwali.
Yeah.
They held fire, but also held position, until some Germans tempted them out of the trenches with cigars and cigarettes. Soon the men were smoking together on the parapet. That Christmas night, the troops slept in sublime quiet. Christmas Day dawned, bright and cold, the sky clear for the first time in weeks. To their shock, British troops looked across no man's land to see the Germans walking around on their parapets. Such a thing was suicidal in daylight, and that gesture of trust, more than anything, lured a few British out. It was heaven to at last stand up straight and walk on solid earth. Some had ventured into no man's land on Christmas Eve, but in daylight it was impossible.
Man, you cannot even process being in trenches for months and months in gruesome fighting to just walk on the plain earth in sunlight. How good that would have felt. And obviously all the dead bodies like they saw here, it would have been ridiculous. You can't process all that. Doesn't matter how much involved you were in the fight, you can't process that. Finally walking on the ground, sun is shining and yet there are still dead bodies there. But Germans are not showing hostilities, British are not showing hostilities. It's just, yeah.
Possible to ignore the bodies lying between the trenches. The two sides buried their dead in common graves, grieving side by side in joint services, listening to the faraway sounds of battle from other sectors. And that shared experience broke down the wall. Soldiers milled about together in no man's land, swapping overabundant gifts from home. British beef for uniform buttons, chocolate cake for barrels of beer. They exchanged hats. One German barber gave haircuts. The men chatted. After all, they shared so much in common. They lived in the same fields under the same rain, and they were equally sick of war. Besides, they were curious. What was life like on the other side? Who were these enemies? One British officer was perplexed to learn that his new German friend believed the armies of the Kaiser fought for freedom. That was impossible, the officer responded. We're fighting for freedom. Amid this, Lieutenant Hulse found himself talking to Lieutenant Thomas of the 15th West.
That is so true. in usually, obviously, excluding World War II, where Hitler was really a bad person. Most wars, people are told that, enemies are these devilish, evil people who just want to do evil things. That's not the case most of the times. Both people are under the same thought that enemies are bad, enemies are wrong, and yet there are other factors going on. Rarely there are cases like World War II where someone like Hitler is in power who want to do heinous things. So obviously when people meet like this, then they realize, wait a minute, I thought you were evil, but you're not. You're just like me. So obviously that would come inside you like, damn, that's heavy. We've been killing all of them, and yet this is just all stupid political thing.
Westphalians, who had something to pass on, a Victoria Cross and a packet of letters. An English officer had died in the German trench during the last attack. Perhaps he could give these to the man's family? Touched, Hulse removed his own silk scarf, a gift from home, and presented it in thanks. Thomas, embarrassed that he had nothing to give in return, sent a soldier to fetch the fur gloves that his family had sent. Up and down the line, men started bringing out footballs. Kickabouts broke out, with men from both sides chasing the ball among shell holes and sliding on the frozen ground. In one sector, a group of Highlanders challenged a Saxon regiment.
This is dangerous. British versus Germany football match. Truce can broker it right here. Truce can broke entirely here. One team scores 2 or 3 goals more, and they are like, you know what? This is war. This is effed up, man.
Who burst out laughing whenever a kilt flew up during play. But not all of this activity was goodwill. On both sides, a few used the gatherings to reconnoiter enemy trenches, and both sides used the time to repair dugouts. Of course, for some, this fraternization appeared false. One British soldier flashed his squad mate a hidden dagger, while another refused to smoke German cigarettes, fearing that they might be poisoned. When one squad of Bavarians discussed whether to meet the British, their corporal snapped at them. Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left at all? They weren't surprised. The night before, the same soldier had refused to join the unit's Christmas service. Corporal Hitler was odd like that. But his disapproval reflected the general's view. This was exactly the situation that Field Marshal French had feared. Commanders dispatched senior officers to threaten disciplinary action and insist that the men restart the war. In some sectors, the...
Wait a minute, I missed that part. Corporal Hitler, so that was Hitler? God damn.
Some sectors, the armistice came to an orderly close. Officers from both sides saluted and fired revolvers into the air, signaling that, all right, the war was back on. In a few places, troops resisted until nearly to New Year's Eve, but the generals would not have it. German command dispatched snipers to break the ceasefire. French ordered an artillery barrage, letting the machinery of war roll over the human connections of the frontline troops. Nothing like this Christmas truce would happen again. The generals wouldn't allow it. On Christmas Eve 1915, British officers ordered a 24-hour artillery barrage. Men who tried to form a truce were court-martialed. Machine guns drowned out German carols. But the generals needn't have bothered. The spirit of that truce was unique to 1914, a symptom of a young war. By Christmas 1915, those troops had experienced chlorine gas and creeping bombardments. Zeppelins were bombing London. The Battle of Verdun would end just before the holiday, leaving 750,000 casualties. Indeed, many of the men who celebrated in no man's land that day would never see another Christmas. One of those unlucky ones was Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse, who had sung carols and given a German officer his silk scarf. He died 3 months later while trying to save a wounded comrade. He was 25. And yet, Hulse is not remembered today for his military achievements, or even the book of letters that his friends published after his death. He and so many others are remembered for a victory entirely their own, when a group of brave men ventured into the line of fire, trusting their enemies not to shoot, and believing that humanity was better than the bonfire it had built for itself. Happy holidays, everybody.
That was great story actually. Actually, that's awesome that it happened. I mean, in the midst of that kind of fighting, they are like, we done. You know what this is? This is Christmas. This is ridiculous. We are all humans. They played football. They shake hands together. This is a great uplifting story, man. People should talk about this story a lot more, especially around time of Christmas, because you can't have better example of Christmas miracle than this one. It happened in middle of World War One. That's ridiculous. In the trenches, one of the most awful things that ever happened. The trenches, not the truce. I mean, this was just heavy. Obviously, generals were like, enough of this. Get back to fighting. Their job is to make sure the fighting keeps going on and finish the fighting. And afterwards, everybody gas attacks and just tons of people died. The attack on London with the Zeppelins. It was just very horrible. But this was at least something was uplifting. That was good. Man, that was really Hitler. I missed it. I had to pause and hear it back again. But yeah, that was Corporal Hitler. Damn, that was heavy. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.